Don't miss the return of BizBash Live Los Angeles on Wednesday, July 19th at the California Market Center. Secure your spot today at bizbash.com/ExpoLA with the code GATHER for 10% off your pass.
Are you followers?
9, 8,
Okay, so we're gonna probably add.
Welcome to GatherGeeks, a podcast by BizBash, the place where people passionate about meetings and events come together. Here are your hosts, BizBash CEO David Adler and Executive Editor Beth Kormanik.
Today on GatherGeeks, we're going to urge you to do an exercise, to look yourself in the mirror, actually not just you, but your event in the mirror, and see whether it's working or not. We're going to sit down with what we call event doctors, and they're going to tell us how they diagnose problems and reinvigorate an event. So without further ado, listen to John Folks and Katie Callahan-Giobbi from the Chicago-based event consulting firm Minding Your Business to tell us how it's done.
Welcome, Katie and John, to GatherGeeks. We're here in Chicago, and we want to find out what you do, what makes you tick, and why you guys are kind of the doctors to organizations. I mean, you call yourselves consultants, but you're coming in to fix it, to give people the broad scope view of how they can change their view of the world. Tell us, what is your elevator pitch of what you guys do?
That's great. Well, yes, we are kind of doctors. We do help organizations really be more successful, I think. You know, as it relates to their meeting, I think we're really focused on helping them create, design, produce more effective meetings, more compelling meetings, so that they can drive attendance, drive value, and hopefully drive loyalty of those people that they're going after to come to these events.
So go into the macro picture. Live gatherings of people so important today, and why do organizations, are they losing their competitive edge because of other things in the world? Katie, what is your opinion? I know you have an opinion on this.
Well, that's actually a really good question, right? So as every organization thinks about the value that they bring to their community, right, and what that value looks like, they have different ways to express how you kind of create that value. And oftentimes, and we would believe that the face-to-face meeting is a wonderful and very important way to really bring your brand alive and to really help kind of advance whatever it is that mission is of your organization. We work with a lot of medical associations. We work with a lot of trade associations. We work in the trade show business. And regardless of the organization, they're all interested in helping to kind of further the mission by making these connections. And the face-to-face piece of that, I think, has never been more important than it is today.
Okay, so go into the whole idea of the medical meetings, in a sense. You have what you sometimes think of as introverts, in many cases. Maybe they're not, I don't know, but they're sort of the general. How do you get them to buy in to creating energy of these face-to-face events? Or are they naturals?
Well, I think that's really interesting because, you know, you do have such a variety of different types of people that are attending all these events, but you're right, at a lot of these medical meetings, you do have a lot of introverts. And I think what we find is that, you know, the kind of networking that you kind of design for these events has to be customized to the group. And for these more introverted groups, and for medical meetings in particular, where they're there for education first and foremost, there's an opportunity to create more opportunities for peer-to-peer learning, because that really is a value driver for that group, for sure. Wouldn't you agree?
I would agree, but it's funny because a lot of the medical groups and scientific societies that we work with, they are scientists. They are, you know, in a world unto themselves. They're highly skilled, highly trained, highly educated. But they also want to have that kind of hip and cool factor too. And especially when we think in terms of the older generation versus the younger generation and kind of what they're looking for. So even some of the more staid, you know, organizations that are kind of, they've been doing it the same way for a lot of years, what they're struggling with is how do we continue to deliver on that promise for the older generation versus how do we start to change it up for those that are coming through medical school who are just getting into our.
Is it really that different? Between the older and the younger. Tell us when you design for today.
Yeah.
You have to design for all generations.
Yeah.
What is the different secret sauces for each one?
Well, I think before we even talk about what the differences are, I think, you know, the macro issue here, trend, is certainly attendees' expectations for a customized experience. And I think that's for medical meetings, and that's for any kind of meeting out there or event. You know, people are attending because they expect to get a very customized experience. They want what they want, when they want it, how they want it. And so that means that we are delivering the kind of experience and the kind of education and the kind of networking that a younger person wants, which may be, I'm coming to this meeting as a younger person to find a job, to get a mentor, to learn some new skills. I may be a senior level person. I may not be coming for the education. I may be coming to see my friends. This is my community. It may be I've got a bigger issue that I'm trying to deal with, and I'm looking for some higher level solutions to challenges. I may be looking for employees, et cetera, et cetera. So there's very different reasons why people are attending.
And the approach that we take that I think many organizations don't put enough focus on is really the research behind understanding your audiences.
Mm-hmm. And how do you do that? This is a Katie rule.
Yeah.
Like how do you go in there with, we can talk about this,
yeah,
but how do you do it?
Yeah.
I mean, everybody talks about it, right? But you guys have a methodology, I would assume, or else you wouldn't be in business.
Mm-hmm.
We do.
Mm-hmm. So our approach is very much research-based and very much kind of data-driven, right? So when you think about that, okay, well, great, we have 10,000 people coming to our conference. How do we understand what they really want to create that unique experience? Well, we help organizations look at all of that, right? Both from a qualitative and a quantitative point of view, to start to stitch together the story that is relevant for each of those audiences within your community.
Okay, so take me to day one of the actual job is starting. Are you doing surveys? Are you doing interviews? I mean, what are you doing, and what have you learned not to do?
Well, the first thing that we do is kind of look at what kind of data and research has the organization itself collected, because we want to make sure we're not duplicating.
Is it
efforts.
usually pretty bad?
It varies. It's really all over the board.
Episodic.
I will say that most organizations do have data. They do have research, but many of them don't know what to do with it.
Or look at it.
Right. They don't understand, how to interpret it, or it gets done because it has been getting done every single year, that post-event survey, et cetera.
Or it's tucked in different parts of the organization.
Right. So we help to kind of aggregate all of that, collect it all, take a look at it more comprehensively, find out where the gaps of information are, and then we'll put together our research plan. And we'll start out with kind of qualitative approach, so interviewing key stakeholders internally to the organization to really get an idea of the landscape, the biggest picture of the profession, the organization, and the lives of those kind of prospective attendees.
When you interview the internal constituents, is that sort of like opens up a whole Pandora's box?
It can.
And what have you learned? What has been the most sort of obvious thing that you see that's common to all of those?
Well, what it starts to do is it starts to put together kind of a fuller picture of that story, right? So that when we initially meet with a CEO of an organization, for example, we'll hear his or her perspective. And by talking to some of these other stakeholders, we start to kind of round out that story. So there may be some other issues that are percolating in the minds of these other stakeholders that maybe didn't surface as readily from the initial conversation.
Is that because the CEO, they're going to listen to this and say, oh my God, why do I need a consultant coming in? Why can't I just figure this out on my own? It's always easier to have someone else tell you or to go look in?
Sometimes it's hard to see the forest for the trees, when you're in the forest.
Yeah, and most CEOs don't see the forest for the trees unless they have a process.
Yeah,
I think that most do understand that there are issues, right? That's why they've hired us, because they've identified that there are some challenges within the organization, but they may just not know how best to deal with it, what the plan is, and they also may need to kind of get other people on board. And the way that we find that we get people on board more easily is through this research process, right?
So the process itself is part of the secret sauce.
That's right. To get people on board, because if we can kind of demonstrate with data, here are the specific problems, here are the challenges, because your members, your attendees, whoever those stakeholders are telling us, here are the challenges. We can then start to determine where they are today in the perception of those people. And then we can start to say, well, gosh, based on that, and this is where you want to be, we can then build the roadmap.
So if you're going and doing these internal audits, internal research, and your experience, the leader or the CEO has one set of sort of things he thinks. Where's the guy that's usually right? Is there that person that kind of knows, and so you're really, or is it completely always a whole nother theory of the case?
Well, it's interesting you say that because in our work, we deal with not only CEOs and senior staff, but also we get very involved in board discussions or task force or committees, right? So we get to really have conversations with the volunteer leadership of these various organizations, associations as well. And I think that it's true that in many cases, right, you have a lot of very smart, very brilliant people. Now, maybe they say, well, you don't know our industry. But then, to John's point, we come to the table with aggregating all this research, overlaying our own research, so that we can start to tell a compelling story, so that everybody around the table starts to see and starts to nod that, oh, I get it, right? And we help to kind of tell that story with some strong recommendations on where the organization should go in the future.
And helping us determine where the organization should go, we've worked with, over 100 different associations on a lot of different strategic projects. So we've got a lot of benchmarking information. So we can help organizations to determine where they stand with regard to other organizations on things like member or attendee satisfaction levels, net promoter scores, other kinds of KPIs or key performance indicators that really determine the health of an organization. And so when you start to see yourself compared to other like organizations, you can then start to determine, oh gosh, we really need to work on that.
Well, let's go back to the doctor analogy.
Mm.
I mean, you've seen 100 patients,
yeah,
at least. And you go in and you see, you diagnose, you go in there and you have a blink diagnostic, and then you have to support that. Is it usually something that you see fairly quickly, or is it something that you really have to dig into in order to justify the things that you want to change? Or is it when a doctor comes in, you got a cold? Oh, you got a cold. How do you look at that?
I think it's a combination. I mean, oftentimes there are certain things that surface pretty quickly, right? Because a lot of organizations, for example, many organizations we find, and the larger the organization, the more siloed they are. So there's not a lot of, oftentimes there is not as much communication between those silos, those departments, as there should be, or we think there should be.
Is that the John number one?
So that usually we can identify that fairly quickly.
Okay.
Right. When we start those internal stakeholder conversations and we see, where the CEO has one view of the world and, the directors of these other departments may not be necessarily aligned. Well, they're right there. We know that there's some issues. Communication and siloing.
So the other thing that we have to do very quickly is try to assess how much change do they really want? Do they want to blow it up, or do you just want to put lipstick on a pig, right?
Okay, so what's your experience on that? I know it's all different for each one, but when they bring you in, they're not going to spend the kind of money it would take to really analyze what they're doing if they're not thinking of.
They want real change. And what we help them do is to digest that change and kind of implement it over time.
Right.
Because change does take time.
Right.
And we're talking not just about changing policies and procedures or changing a meeting. We're talking about cultural change in an organization, and that does take time.
Does culture trump everything else?
Ooh, that's a great question. That's a whole nother podcast.
Yes.
Culture eats strategy for lunch. Is that the same?
I mean, are you going in there and you're really having to change
David,
the culture?
It's because
in some ways, yeah. Sometimes, yes.
Well, not only are they complex organizations unto themselves, but to John's point, they're in complex industries.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter if you're a scientific society or if you're an association or a trade association. Life is complicated today. And so not only do we look at the organization, but we also look at some of those other disruptors that might be coming down the pike.
Right, the environmental scan. So we're kind of looking at the landscape of that profession and what is coming down the pike that's really going to those external factors that are going to
Is that the number two thing? Once communicate, like to try to sort of look at your diagnostic checklist.
Going back to kind of the process, after our discovery process and looking what they've got, we will go to that qualitative and interview those internal and external stakeholders. And then that will help to inform, the results of that will help to inform a survey, the quantitative piece. So we'll go out to a much broader audience and test some of the ideas that we heard, some of the trends that we heard surface in our interviews, to verify that from a quantitative standpoint. At the same time, then we'll go out and we'll start to look at that kind of environmental scan, those external factors that are impacting the profession and the lives of those people that we're talking to. And then we'll do a competitive analysis. So really look at who else are you competing with for the time and the energy and the money of all those people that you're trying to get to participate in your events or participate in your organization.
So how many external factors, with the world speeding up so fast, are all of your patients, using that analogy, does the external factors have a bigger role now than ever because of what's happening and people have to adjust, or is it fixing on the margins?
It depends.
I think that it really does, because think in terms of technology.
So you're saying it does. External is going to be really important.
Think about marketing
huge.
communications
Yes.
and the average person. We are so inundated with marketing communication messages, right? And so here we are trying to get your attention to how do we cut through the clutter? That must be the number one question that we get. How do we cut through the clutter, right? How do we carve out that unique value proposition in our space so that we are creating and delivering something so unique, so valuable that you must come to our event, you must be a part of our community.
And how do you answer that question? I know that it's all individualized, but the relevancy of that kind of community is changing.
Well, relevancy is absolutely at the core of that value proposition, right? Without relevancy, that's where you have to start, right? And then beyond that, it's got to be compelling relevancy, because, look at what we're doing today, right? We're delivering some content through a podcast. More and more people are using technology to get their information free in many cases, right? So what is the compelling and relevant reason for me to attend an event face-to-face, to spend the time and the money to actually go to some other place, to spend 3 or 4 days out of my office, and to kind of participate in this event? You've got to have, it's got to be, as Katie said, it's got to be unique.
What makes it that, I believe that we're in, I use the line that content is no longer king, contact is king.
Or the context.
The context and contact, it was shorthanding that. But the idea is, though, how do you turn an association, old school association, into something that's relevant for a new generation?
I think at the center of that is this whole human need to be part of a community, being part of something that's bigger than yourself. And I think that that's the one thing that meetings and events do provide in a very experiential, visual way, is that you can attend an event and feel like you are part of a bigger community. And there's also that opportunity to kind of have that spontaneous connection with
but
people,
how do you
right?
transform the people that are going meeting after meeting after meeting every year, and all of a sudden you come in and you identify the problems?
Yeah.
That transition has got to be painful. Yes? I see you nodding on a podcast. It's hard to nod on a podcast.
It can be very painful. It's funny because we like to step back and think very holistically, right? And so let's begin with the end in mind. What does success look like for this meeting? It's the age-old planning questions, right? Where are we going? Right? How did we get here?
Yeah.
How are we going to get to where we're going? Right? And how do we know that we've arrived? What is it that we're trying to solve for at the end of the day? And so we believe that organizations have to take that very holistic look at kind of what they're trying to solve for, and then how does that meeting fit into that piece? So let's say, for example, that we have an initiative where we're really trying to groom, younger talent coming in, or perhaps it's female surgeons, or perhaps it's the international marketplace, right? Where is that pain point? And then what strategies and tactics do we employ that make sense to that audience, and how does that get incorporated into the meeting or into the other offerings of the society or association?
And I think what this is really based in, David, is understanding who your audience is and who your prospective audience is and what their needs and wants and desires are, right? So you've got to, that's why this research piece is so critical, because where, as Katie said, beginning with the end in mind, well, we've got to create something that people want. And it's got to be solving a problem. So if we have identified where those gaps are, if people are really challenged, if our prospective attendees are really challenged by some of these external factors, for example, healthcare, the changes in healthcare legislation, the healthcare landscape is so right now just in such tumult. So it is really it's very a difficult place for a lot of physicians and medical professionals to be successful in. So what is it that meeting can provide to make that easier, to provide the solutions a pathway for people to understand the legislation. What does it mean to me? And provide working sessions to understand kind of how can I be more successful.
So what I'm learning from you today is that the normal way of planning a meeting, we're going to pick October 17th and we're going to invite the people, that if you're not strategically thinking about how to solve the problem first of your community, you're becoming not relevant. And in a way, your secret sauce is to help them solve a problem and flipping the model a lot. And that's a huge takeaway, especially when the logistics people are control and not the strategy people. Are you saying, am I going to?
No, I think you just touched on something that's really critical, which is the entire focus of the event has traditionally been from the organization's perspective, right? It's the organization creating an event, a general event for a group of stakeholders. Now, the thrust has to be an attendee-centric event that is customized to each attendee's needs, wants, and desires. And that's where the challenge is, because when you start talking about a 10 or 15,000 person event, how do you customize that event for all of those?
Okay, how do you do that? How do you do that? I mean, how do you create what I think IBM is calling a cognitive event?
Well, in many cases, right, we're working with customers, clients of ours who have an existing event that we want to continue to shape and mold versus coming to market with a brand new event, which we've done as well, right? And so that has a lot of strategy built into it from the very beginning, so that we are not tweaking an existing event, but we are actually creating a completely new event. And what's interesting is, as our customers and clients start looking at this event, again, back to my earlier point, how far do you want to push change?
Right.
Because we have to help guide them on that. We also then are typically asked to say, well, let's step back and look at all of the events that we do. So it's not just the annual meeting, but perhaps it's also those regional events. And how do they fit into our meetings portfolio? And how do we, again, think more broadly about, well, who is it we're serving and where are the gaps in our offerings? And maybe we need to be thinking in terms of a new regional meeting or a new annual meeting or a new professional symposium or whatever the answer may be. Because, again, what does success look like?
So for risk tolerance they want to bring you in, the chances are they want to really make some changes in many cases. I mean, what is your suggestion? Is it to blow it up? Or is it to be incremental?
Generally speaking, I think it's incremental because, going back to your question.
Associations.
Yeah, I think so. I think because, they're very risk averse to begin with. And so, the way that we present our design path, if you will, is through prioritizing those things that are going to bring the most value the most quickly to the stakeholders.
And we take a look at those initial KPIs. So if you, for example, say, well, gosh, our attendance has been declining, right? That's an indicator that something's happening, right? That has implications to your revenue streams. We can also have that same conversation around strategic partnerships or exhibitors. There may be a membership. It may be overlaying with a membership decline as well. So again, all of that you have to step back and say, well, why is this happening? And what's happening in the competitive landscape? And then what is it that we need to do to this meeting to start to shift that to get more people to come? Yeah. And what does success look like? Like, how are we going to kind of help to recreate this event to where it has that presence that it used to have?
So let's go a little bit into some of the solutions that you are proudest of. Either the incremental change that had really changed an organization or dramatic change. What would be the thing that you would tell a customer about or tell your at the cocktail party saying, I just did this today and it was amazing?
Well, I would give one example. One association that we've worked with, it's in the medical field. They were an organization that did not have a lot of females in their leadership or really engaged in their volunteer structure. And we've been working with this organization over a couple of years, and it was a proud moment when I heard at one of their conventions that a female, told me, gosh, isn't it nice to see how many women are involved in this organization? So So over just a short period of time, from kind of a pain point of we don't have enough females.
Did you identify that, or did they identify that?
It was well identified.
It was identified before you got
It was
there.
well
So
identified.
they knew that they
Yeah.
had to make
But
that.
So we helped them.
culturally, it was an
Yes,
organization, right?
It's part of that
So
other
we helped them
podcast.
create, right. But we helped them create the strategy to engage
Culturally.
more women, to
Right.
get them more
Exactly.
involved in the organization, to provide some value points that women would be attracted to and
Right.
feel like they could be, that this is their organization as well. Back to your question about, how do we customize a 10,000 person event
Yeah.
to really start to drive more value for more people. And what we find with most organizations is that it's not so much that they're not offering the kinds of things that a variety of different kinds of attendees would like to engage with. It's just that it may be a communication problem. So with some of these larger meetings, you've got so much going on, David, that people don't even realize, registrants don't even realize everything that's going on. So you may have, for example, if one of your goals is to engage more young people into the organization. So you may have started a first-timers orientation program. You may have a mentorship program at the meeting. You may have some tracks built for some younger people at levels of education that they would find more interesting. But if they can't find it on the reg site, or they can't find it in the program, then it doesn't exist. So one of the things that we do help organizations also do is to communicate their value more clearly to the people that want to know that, right?
So I guess you're saying that design and UX is more important than ever.
Mhm.
And segmenting your communications.
Okay,
So understanding
talk about that.
who are those people. So understanding who are the people that are coming to my
What's
meeting,
important to them?
what's important to them, and start to talk to them specifically and only about those things.
Are you getting involved in personas?
We
Things
are.
like that? Is that a big part of what you do now?
We
Because it seems like it's
absolutely
very popular,
Mm.
but it has to be done correctly.
Mhm.
People
It
can
does.
go down the wrong path with personas.
They can, and that's why we've got a 5-person full-time research team that help guide us through that process, because it is a challenging process. You can easily get down a rabbit hole and misread the data. But
Do you have any really fun personas that you that you've identified? Because that's always when you hear the names of the personas. Have you gotten any that like?
I don't know that I can off the top of my head.
Or may not be able to tell.
That's right. That's right. We do have some behind the scenes.
Yeah,
But what's
like
interesting
clients
is-
will probably have some personas too.
But even after we help an organization develop the personas, that's really just the first
beginning.
step, right? Because now we have to actually have an operational plan against that.
Right.
Yeah.
And we actually have to help them test and retest and measure and to see if indeed we're moving the needle. Because at the end of the day, if we're not being more customized, if we're not moving the needle, if we aren't driving loyalty and increasing satisfaction, then
For
And
each
how
of
do
those
you, how do you,
personas,
but
yeah.
how do you merchandise back to the organization that you're making these moves? Is it through research?
Yeah.
Or is it like, we know that a lot of times the ROI of events, the CEO thinks it's a good event, and they have no clue whether
That's
it's a
right.
good event.
you know,
Getting everybody on board with
Yeah.
the same metrics, the
Yeah.
key, the success
KPIs.
metrics. At the end of the meeting,
What are the traditional KPIs?
yeah, typically it's funny when you ask that because we do a lot of speaking and talking to people, and it's
Yeah.
like, okay, raise your hand if you have a dashboard.
Right.
What are those KPIs for even just your meeting, let alone the organization? And I'm shocked at the number of people who really don't think in those terms because they default to revenues, number of people that have attended. I had one gentleman say, well, Katie, we had a 5% increase in attendance. I said, congratulations. Which segment grew? And they said, oh, it was our spouse segment. Well, okay, that wasn't the segment we
better
were
shopping.
trying to grow.
You really increase their
Exactly.
shopping.
So the
Exactly.
devil is really
But
in the
that's an
details.
awful
Yeah.
sexist thing to say. Retract that from the
That's
record.
But do you see what I'm saying? That just because you had a growth, was it planned, was it purposeful? What do you?
Yes, exactly, purposeful. And I think, to that end, those key KPIs should link back to the organizational strategy, right? So if part of our strategy as an organization is that we want to grow international engagement. So we're going to utilize our annual meeting as a catalyst for that. Then one of those KPIs should be, how are we doing with international attendees? And the other thing with international attendees we found most organizations treat international attendees the same ways, right? But and you're speaking to them with the same message. But we found that the developing world versus the first world are coming to your meeting for different reasons as well, with different needs. And so you really got to talk to them again about different types of benefits that you're going to provide, right? And highlight different things about the meeting because they are so very different. Someone coming from France or Germany may be coming for a very different reason than someone is coming from Africa.
Do you see the international, the globalist approach now everywhere, or is it? I mean, with associations especially, can they only grow globally, or are they growing domestically?
I think most organizations are probably coming around to the fact that for sustainable growth, they're going to have to look much more globally.
But it's interesting because we'll have conversations with them about what market share do they currently have, and are they attracting? Do they have a high percentage of market share of existing segments versus growing domestically into other segments that may be related or growing? So, what does growth mean, right?
Right, and what percentage of a physiatrist do you have coming to your meeting? Of the world of physiatrists in the United States, no less in the world. And most organizations can't necessarily answer that. Now, it's not an easy question to answer, but you have to start there. What percentage of the world do we have already to be able to chart that growth pattern?
So if they can't come here to Chicago and hire you guys because of this brain trust that you created,
we'll go to them.
We'll go to them.
We'll go to them.
Okay, no problem.
We travel.
What does someone do that just getting into this that wants to learn more about how to segment and use research and things like that? Are there any sort of basic 101s that every person in the event world and the association world needs to know to build their intellectual capital so that they can have a conversation with you that makes sense?
I would suggest that people step outside of their comfort zone. And when they attend a lot of the industry events, I find that meeting professionals tend to stay in the meeting professional track. And I think they need to push themselves to go to a track about research or about marketing communications, because that may not be a comfort zone, but I think that's where real strategy starts to happen, is when you start to really push outside of your own comfort zone and have a little bit broader thinking beyond just the logistics of planning a meeting.
Right. Do you think that's really the really sort of failing of the industry right now in terms of teaching the holistic aspect, the strategy aspect? I mean, it's in the same in marketing. There's a whole difference between a creative director and a strategist.
That's right.
People confuse creativity with strategy.
Absolutely.
Right.
But a meeting planner cannot, we're talking about the meeting professional in specific, they cannot just focus on the meeting and the logistics alone anymore. They've got to be in tune with the marketing, the segmentation. They've got to be in tune with the impact to membership if there happen to be an association, or the sales strategy if it happens to be a corporate meeting, because that's focused on customers. So they need to have a much more holistic view of their organization and the goals and objectives of that meeting as it relates to the goals and objectives of the organization, for sure.
I think listeners to this podcast are probably getting bored with me saying that event organizers have to be collaboration artists now, and that they have to, that we're really programmers of human interaction, not necessarily doing what we think we're doing, and that there's a great book out, which I've been telling people about every day, called Social Physics, How Ideas Flow, and understanding how ideas bounce off of people and how it has to be thought of, that everything that you do from the neuroscience of it, that all works together, that we're in the most exciting industry in the world, we just have to practice it better. So, so with that, tell us your sense of what you want to do that you haven't done yet, that's in the back of your mind to advance the world of what you do. There's something when you're sitting in all these meetings, and let's say you're the client, and you're recommending something to you. What would you be doing?
Wow. Well, I do think that because we've worked with so many organizations, we've got a lot of research and a lot of data across a lot of different kind of vertical markets. And I think one of the things that we really want to do over the next year or so is to kind of really aggregate that, produce some white papers that we can share with the industry so that people can start to understand maybe where are some of those KPIs, what are some of those benchmarks that we should be looking at as an organization to understand the health of our organization as well and our meeting specifically. So,
and I would add that the world continues to change. Our work is never done. because the world continues to change. So just as these organizations are figuring it out, so too is the environment and the world in which they operate. And so for that, this job is never done.
Well, also, I believe that you guys are lifelong learners,
Mm-hmm.
and that's another sort of. And so, what do you guys do to keep up on the worlds that you're experimenting in and advising in? Like, where do you get your inspiration?
Good bottle of wine.
Well, there's nothing wrong with it. Symposium. Did you hear that the Greek word for symposium is drinking game? And on that note, tell us how we can get in touch with either one of you.
Well, that's terrific. You can get in touch with Katie by dialing 312-870-7103. Katie Callahan-Giobbi at myb.net.
Spell that, please.
KATIE.CALLAHANGIOBBI@myb.net. I know, nice Irish girl marries Italian boy.
And they can't
That's how
decide
that
what
happened.
name they're going to keep. So they're going to keep them both.
And John?
John Folks at myb.net, john.folks at myb.net. And we look forward to exploring more ways to helping organizations, for sure.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. We can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Player FM, Google Play, and Pocket Cast. Be sure to leave us a rating and review. It helps others discover the GatherGeeks podcast. We'd also love to hear from you. You can leave feedback on Twitter at GatherGeeks or leave us an email, gathergeeks@bizbash.com. We hope you'll join us again for the next episode of GatherGeeks. Until then, gather on. Don't forget to register for BizBash Live Los Angeles on July 19th at the California Market Center. Join nearly 1,500 fellow event pros at the must-attend event of the year. Secure your spot today at bizbash.com/ExpoLA with code GATHER for 10% off your pass.